So an overview of the agenda. So the first content item will be Core and Central Europe program update with key consideration and outlook, and an update on the Celtic interconnector. Then we will switch to Central Europe CCR with day-ahead capacity calculation, explaining regulatory approval on day-ahead capacity calculation methodology, and explanation of the Central Europe day-ahead capacity calculation methodology and outlook. Then we will break. After the break, we will start the session on core CCR with a big chunk on long-term capacity calculation, outline and roadmap with stakeholder management milestones. Then there will be long-term capacity calculation methodology amendment overview, a deep dive on the benchmark, reference solution for revenue adequacy and technical concept, and an introduction of the external parallel run setup. Then also still included in the long-term capacity calculation, the impact on day-ahead capacity calculation, which includes the removal of LTA inclusion. There will be feedback from market parties on the TSO's initial impact assessment. Then an analysis of the alpha factor with 2025 SDAC results, and the solution put forward in the fourth proposal for amendment to day-ahead capacity calculation methodology. We will have a second break that's for lunch, so we will connect again at 1 p.m. and starts with day-ahead capacity calculation. There will be notably like the day-ahead capacity calculation methodology amendment with the overview. So it's related to also like, sorry, I did not mention it, but the current consultations as well. And an update on advanced hybrid coupling. Then we will go to intraday capacity calculation with a follow-up on operational processes, intraday capacity calculation amendment overview, IDCCD planning, then capacity improvement study, planning of the improvements as well, and then MinRAM assessment. We'll have another break and reconnect at 3 p.m. And I think then there is an item on, thank you very much, on derogation on the minimum 70% requirement beyond 2025. And their NRAs will be given an overview of the derogation beyond 2025. And we'll close the meeting with an AOB as well, with also information on next core CG meeting. That's it for today.
Thanks, Zeli. Any points for the agenda that somebody wants to raise or up front? If not, then let's go to the first topic, and that is a general core and CE program update with some key considerations and the outlook. Also explaining where we are in the different topics, and a special item on the Celtic interconnector planning that is fitting into the program. And for the presentation, ask Steve
I will guide you
to walk you through the program and through the topics.
Also, by the way, welcome from my side, representing core TSOs as well as ELIA. For those that don't know, I'm Steve van Kampenhout from ELIA. So we have prepared a small update on the roadmap of core and CE. Those who are following the CG are familiar with this slide structure. Several of the topics will come later on in the presentation. So let's not go into too much all of the details. But if there are burning questions, you can, of course, ask them whilst I'm presenting. So let's walk together through it. Firstly, on the long-term capacity calculation, you have seen it in the agenda. We are moving towards the flow-based implementation in November 2026. It's in consultation, an amendment that we are preparing with respect to how to have an improvement of the size of the domain. And this is connected, obviously, to some other amendments in day-ahead and intraday in relation to the wall of the LTA inclusion over there. And that's a separate package that we will extensively discuss throughout the session today. That's all happening in core. On the side of Central Europe. So every time that we have a time frame, I will explain core and Central Europe, where we are in both settings. On the side of Central Europe, there is not yet a formalization of the time frame, meaning that it's not yet part of the CCR's scope. This is something that we see coming at a much later stage, as we first want to see what comes out of the market design FCA 2.0 discussions. So that's in the fridge for now. Day ahead capacity calculation, the big novelty that is in the pipe as coming next year is a switch to advanced hybrid coupling in core. We will also come back to that with Philip. Will present it later in a session today, where we start with that. It's coming soon. Another evolution in core, which is then transitioning further into Central Europe, is the so-called coordinated validation. So coordinated validation, this is assessing together, top-down, what are the remedial actions that can be used in order to get as close as possible to the 70%, and if you cannot sustain that, to reduce the capacities. So now we are doing it all with our individual well-developed tools, and this will be a coordination layer that will be the first layer in the process before individual validation takes place. Implementation there is stepwise, with first steps coming in core in the next 1-2 years. It will not yet be finished, but we will then continue the implementation in Central Europe. Central Europe, by the way, which is then aimed to go live in January 2028. So it's again kind of a multi-year trajectory with several steps. And in order to, let's say, unlock the full use of remedial actions across the region, so fully the cross-border activations, we will need to have the corresponding operational security analysis process in place that is called the WOSC process. We are also working on integration of Switzerland into our capacity calculation. This is happening both on the sides of core, with an intermediate solution to be put in place, and then another solution that has been designed for Central Europe, and this will be part of the presentation as well, a short recap of what this solution is. I think we've already explained it a bit more in depth in a previous session as well. But so here the key message is both coordinated validation and Swiss integration. It's kind of stepwise and transitioning together when you move from core to Central Europe. Can move to the next slide, please.
The Central Europe go live in January 28. That's 1 month or
Let's take the question when we come to the particular topic, but it's coming from a decision of the regulators. So it's the first official date that we have. On intraday, there we are moving forward with a fast pace. I have Peter Thomas here, a convener from the intraday project, sitting next to me, who will also come back to that later in the session today. Moving forward with a fast pace because we are implementing the remaining recalculations. In total, we will have 4 recalculations live. The remaining ones will be done in 2026. And on top of that, we are having a follow-up on a study to see what can be done in terms of increasing the capacities. That's called the MinRAM study. Another big evolution that is upcoming, it's preparing the transition of the intraday auctions towards flow-based allocation. This is planned in 2027. It's of course both the capacity calculation as well as the capacity allocation topic. And this is part of the solution that we need for that is part of the proposal for the amendment to the methodology that is currently in consultation. This has actually two components. One is the transition to flow-based in the auctions, and the other one is advanced hybrid coupling, where there the focus that we are putting in core is to have a study to develop kind of a technical concept that can fit together with what we call a hybrid setup in the allocation side. Because on the allocation side, not the whole intraday market will switch to flow-based. It's first the IDAS, and then at a later point in time, continuous trading. And we have to make sure that these continuous switches between flow-based and ATC world, that they match out. So that's why we are designing a technical concept for that. And it will not go live together. So flow-based and IDAS will be first, and the timing of advanced hybrid coupling, that is then to be still to be seen if it happens in core or if it happens directly in Central Europe. There is no conclusion on that yet. I've talked a lot about Central Europe, and this is indeed what is happening. The expansion, the formal expansion of the region with the intraday timeframe. This is part of an ongoing decisional process on ACER side with respect to the so-called methodology for the determination of the CCRs. Small reminder, in 2024, the CCR Central Europe was created by the previous decision on the CCR determination for the day-ahead timeframe. And now up for decision is expansion to intraday as well as to the WASC timeframe.
Question.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Good morning. Thank you. Quick question on the intraday, the flow base for the IDAs. You said it's going to be calculation and allocation of flow base. Will it be at the same time, or there will be a first step of calculation and then the next step of allocation for the IDAs? Thank you.
Can you precise your question?
You said, so the bullet point on facilitate transition to flow base for IDA in core in 27. You said it's going to be flow base for both calculation and allocation, correct?
Yes.
That's what you said. So will it be at the same time, or there will be a first step of calculation only and then allocation at the second time, or will it be done at the same time?
I get your question now. So we are actually already doing all the calculations in flow-based, but we have to convert them to ATCs, as you know, for running the IDAs in ATCs.
Yeah.
And so what will change is that we will submit the whole flow-based domain, obviously, for the flow-based allocation, but then there is still a step needed after the IDAS in order to convert the resulting remaining capacities back to ATCs for the continuous trading. So this is a step that has to be put in place as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. On the WASC and cost sharing part, so that's a big implementation on core sites. The context there is also quite evolving with respect to the cost sharing part, because there the courts actually annulled the cost sharing methodology. Annulment dates from more or less a year ago, and a new decision on the methodology is being prepared by ACER. And the crux in this context is the rules for the cost sharing itself with respect to the polluter pays, with respect to setting the loop flow thresholds. I will not go really in depth here, but this is a tough topic, I can put it that way. And that's where we are engaging TSOs with the regulators and with ACER to see what is the right approach on how to perform the study that is to be done in order to define the threshold value for these loop flows. So this is an ongoing process as well, without a particular view today how exactly it will end and when it will end. So this is still a journey to be made. As I said, this time frame is also part of the ongoing ENTSO decision on the update of the CCI determination. And the message that we want to send here today is that whilst, so we are in parallel continuing, of course, with the developments in core, and at some point also we'll have to start up the drafting of the methodologies in Central Europe. So this is a consequence when we are formally having intraday and WASC part of the Central Europe CCR, that we, in the first step, need to prepare the methodologies for these timeframes, for these processes, and submit them to the regulators. So this is basically the dynamic that we are in, that we are moving together in two fronts, continuing the implementation in core and developing the methodological framework in Central Europe. Moving closer to real time with balancing. Oh, I see a hand raised from Jean.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for this. Just back to intraday and day ahead, and because you mentioned one of the ECJ decisions on cost sharing, there was also a recent decision on the inclusion of internal CLECs and their validity. So this is quite recent, so maybe there has not been an assessment yet. But do you foresee any impact on the work, both on the integration of day ahead and intraday of the decision so far?
So, yeah, to put a bit of context, this was indeed a ruling, I believe, from 2 weeks ago, where the core day ahead and intraday CCMs have been annulled, because it contains a provision on additional criteria for the inclusion of internal CNECs. Additional criteria, which I mean that there is a basic criteria that the internal CNEC has to be sensitive enough for cross-border exchanges in order to be able to be allowed to form the capacity domain. And the additional criteria were about having to perform a study to demonstrate that it's economically more efficient to include an internal CNEC compared to doing bid investments or reviewing bidding zones. And it's that additional criteria that has been labeled, that has been concluded as invalid for a capacity calculation methodology. So it does not change the current implementation, because the current implementation from the start was already working on this sensitivity criterion, and we did not yet have the study performed on the second part. So operationally wise, it moves forward. Procedural wise, that is in the hands of ACER or the Board of Appeal of ACER in order to determine the next steps to see how it can be made formally compliant again, the methodologies. I'm not sure if there is a representative from ACER in the call who would like to complement if needed. No, not directly. Okay. All right. Then we can move forward. Balancing time frame. So balancing time frame capacity calculation, that will be the last step of capacity calculation to feed the balancing platforms. There, the ambition of the TSOs is to do this calculation, to develop this calculation directly in Central Europe. So not first develop it in core. But it's further on the roadmap because it's going to be after the implementation of intraday and WASC and cost sharing in Central Europe. So it's also not yet part of the formalization in the CCR determination. That is together with long-term for a further future. And so for the moment, the balancing platforms are fed then with the leftovers from the intraday market, and that will be the process for the coming years. Harmonized market-based methodology. So this is actually a pan-European methodology to harmonize how the allocation of cross-functional capacity is to be used for the exchange of balancing capacity. And this is subject to application or not of TSOs, of applying this methodology. And if there are TSOs within the region that want to apply it, then we have to make sure that all the regional methodologies are fit for purpose, meaning that on the day-ahead intraday capacity calculation was carried forward, that this usage of cross-functional capacity is being correctly reflected. We are not yet at that stage. We are at the stage where we are going to assess possible implementation approach, and this assessment will take place until the end of 2026 and is being done in the context of Central Europe.
Asking a question. And what's afterwards? If this assessment says that all bidding zones are already not fit in purpose, comparing the bidding zone review, what Jerome has just asked, what should be the steps in the context of providing social welfare for all market participants?
Can you elaborate where you see the link with the market-based methodology for balancing?
Balancing is something that is the end ring in the whole chain of preserving the stability of markets and the grid. And we see that at some points balancing has not been so liquid as it should be. And remedial actions sometimes are not sufficient to support the needs that grid has to provide. Obviously, markets should be more liquid in providing balancing energy and all other services that operators need. Problem is, if we have loop flows, if we have congestions, we already have visible situation in the day-ahead market that something should be done. We have alert signal. What can we do with that alert signal in order to avoid additional problems in intraday congestions? We felt a dramatic drop of liquidity in continuous intraday trading. In order to give more, let's say, power for the balancing purposes, and also on very last point, giving balancing energy, we see that there are huge spikes, price spikes, huge lack of enough energy, and we see that something should be done. And we are still waiting for more than 7 years bidding zone review. We are still waiting harmonization of different methodologies in order to have harmonized the whole chain. And we feel the problems at the very end, the balancing. Something should be done even before. In intraday, in day ahead, in long term, and everything that's being done is reduction of the capacities from long term to day ahead to intraday, and nothing has been extended in the balancing horizon.
And this methodology will definitely not solve those overarching questions that you put forward. So, okay, you clarified your question. It's not the scope of the methodology. When you talk about bidding zone review and you talk about capacities in intraday, yeah, these are other processes and other discussions indeed. So we will explain what we are doing concretely with respect to intraday capacities and the study around that. And when it comes to bidding zone reviews, you know, it's a process in the hands of the member states for decision making. It's not a core process. So I cannot say more than that. Okay.
Any other points for this part? Then I propose to go to Dwayne, to explain about to give an update actually on the Celtic interconnector and the inclusion in core. Shane, are you online?
Yep. Thanks, Ruud. I'm here. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. Thanks very much, Ruud. So I'll give an update on the status of the Celtic Interconnector project. So for those of you who may not be aware, EirGrid and Sony, the TSOs on the island of Ireland, plan to join the core capacity calculation region and its relevant processes, with the construction of a 700 megawatt HVDC interconnector between Ireland and France, which will be reconnecting the single electricity market on the island of Ireland, comprising Ireland and Northern Ireland, with the European markets again, for the first time after Brexit, and we lost connection with the EU member state. So as a result of this new border between France and the SEM, we need to assign it to a bidding zone, and as you're no doubt aware, we've assigned it to the core CCR. However, there is a construction delay on the Celtic Interconnector. So originally the timeline was to have it live in Q1 2027, but that's been delayed to Q1 2028. So that is causing a replanning requirement for our integration with core CCR and the markets and so on. So we have decided to try and shift the original system and IT and market go live dates to try and accommodate this construction delay as much as possible. The reasons for that is keeping to the original timelines would have meant we would have needed an extra operational overhead, with organising teams and resources well in advance of cable go live, i.e. 12 months in advance of when we actually need them per se. However, we're not shifting everything to the right by 12 months at the same time. So we are trying to discuss various options, or I mean, we have discussed various options with our partners in RTE, the French TSO, and the relevant core and Central Europe project teams and working groups, with an intent to then present our revised plan to the TSOs for their approval, and then to realign with the new construction completion date. The idea behind that is to try and manage the go lives to minimize the amount of testing that has to happen just before go live, so that we spread it out as much as possible, and also take advantage of the fact that the SEM is already in SDAC, even though it isn't in the intraday auctions or the intraday continuous market yet. So we intend to test the SDAC connections and capacity calculation first, and then test the intraday. So we're hoping to do them at different times, the integration with SDAC and CITIC, prior to Q1 28. We don't have the precise dates here yet because we're still agreeing them with the NEMOs and with the TSOs, but that should be completed within the next month, hopefully. And then to also, but alongside all of this, we have already included the Celtic Interconnector in the version of the core day-ahead capacity calculation methodology that's currently under public consultation. So we have accounted for the unique circumstances of the SEM grid and the fact that we're a new synchronous area being added to the existing continental European one. So that is a first for core. It's now got a second synchronous, or it will have a second synchronous area where the two are connected by HVDC interconnectors. So that means there's certain technical considerations in the capacity calculation that have to be managed. So we've accounted for all of that with our colleagues in the flow-based experts project teams for core and also for Central Europe. So we'll be including the Celtic Interconnector and the SEM in the first amendment of the CE day-ahead CCM, which is hopefully due for consultation next year. But we're planning to just iron out all the technical things in the core CCM, and then transplant them to the Central Europe CCM as well, because they'll be much the same from our point of view. Obviously, the CCMs will be different with the inclusion of Italy North and Swissgrid, but for EirGrid and Sony, it'll be much the same. And we've also updated the relevant methodologies for the long-term markets. So for the Fourth Amendment of Core LTTR design, Fourth Amendment of Core HAR Annex, and the Second Amendment of the Core LTSR, which you can see at the links below. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone, but if there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Any questions for Shane? Yeah.
Question. Do we intend to have wrong rates on the link? And also, is it going to be advanced hybrid coupling or not? Like there will be a different node at the end of Celtic interconnector for France.
Shane, could you hear that? Or
I could hear it mostly. Maybe I'll try and answer, and if I got anything wrong, I might just get the speaker to confirm. But yeah, for ramp rates, yes, we will need them because it is a HVDC interconnection. So we need to control the ramp on the interconnector, as we do on the interconnectors we have with Britain at the moment. The exact ramp rates haven't yet been defined, but they are in discussion with RTE, and they depend primarily on the ability of our much smaller power system to ramp the necessary megawatts upwards or downwards on our generating units, because we have a peak load on the island, we'll say, of, is it 7.5 gigawatts compared to continental Europe's hundreds of gigawatts. We're a much smaller system, so we probably won't be able to reach the ramp rates that, say, France can achieve with their connections with Great Britain, for example, where I think they have 100 megawatts a minute ramp rate. So we probably won't be able to achieve that level of like our biggest generating unit would be about 450 megawatts, and we don't have quite as large a system, but we will need ramp rates. So, and I believe we're intending to follow the same process that RTE use on their other interconnectors, with ramping periods either side of the end of the MTU, so plus or minus a certain number of minutes. So a defined ramping period, and then where the interconnector will remain a constant output for the middle of the MTU. So on the first question, I hope that makes sense, and then I'll address the second question.
The question is the representation, that means, is it advanced hybrid coupling, which is foreseen? That means a specific node in front for
yes. Yeah, so depending on your definition of advanced hybrid coupling, it'll be yes or no, because I've heard different definitions being used, but I'll just try and explain how I view it. So we'll basically be trying to follow the process of Allegro as much as possible, as it's the only other HVDC in core at the moment. That, of course, does connect the same synchronous area to itself. So we're not exactly the same, but if you're familiar with the way Allegro is treated, there's a virtual hub, a virtual bidding zone effectively on either end at the converter stations for each end of the cable, and those virtual hubs then have non-zero PTDFs with the connects in continental Europe, but effectively the tool treats each virtual hub as kind of a dead end, or a black hole, if you will, where the power comes in and has to come out the other side, but that the sum of the two, the net position of the two, has to add up to zero. So we'll be doing the same. So basically, the continental European flow-based calculation will proceed as normal. The all the connects on the continent will have some sensitivity to what happens on the French converter station in Brittany. Some obviously more than others. Probably most of the impact will be felt within France, and I don't know how much will be felt within other countries, but it will be some. And then on the Irish side, we'll have
we've lost James.
We have lost my connection.
I'm still connected, I see.
I'm just moving as well.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe I can also try to help make a short recap of the answer. So advanced hybrid coupling in terms of principle functioning, yes. In terms of terminology, it is called a bit different. We call it evolved flow-based because it's a bidding zone border inside of the region. And advanced hybrid coupling is the formal terminology used for bidding zone borders external to the region. But it's the same technical construct and principle behind it. So the same effect in the way how the market optimizes the use of the grid. So the short answer is yes.
Yeah, my connection just dropped there, but Steve, I think you answered the question a lot more concisely than I was doing, so thank you. But yeah, it's basically, it's not strictly advanced hybrid coupling, although to the effect that it affects continental European TSOs, it's as good as, because all the effects will be represented by the virtual hub at the French end of the cable. So.
There will be an Irish node, and there will be something which is like a good, which will be actual.
Yes. When you exchange over the Celtic interconnector, that's the impact, the capacity it uses on a French connect, a German connect, a Belgian connect, any connect of the flow-based domain is taken into account. Yes.
Yeah, the same way that Allegro, the power flowing
exactly.
into or out of each end affects every connect on the continent to a varying degree. It'll be the same for us, except power flows in Ireland won't directly affect what happens on the continent. It'll be just whatever happens at the converter station, because it's a DC connection. So I hope that makes sense. Great.
I see some nodding in the room that the question has been sufficiently answered. Yes.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Is that all the questions on Celtic? Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Shane, for explaining this.
No problem. Thanks, Ruud and
Thanks.
Stephen.
Yeah, see you.
Bye.
Yeah, Zeli, do you want to take over, because we're going now to the content part of the meeting?
Please, I'll do it. So yeah, now we're moving to Central Europe capacity calculation region. I see that we have a few people that will also take on that topic. So it's a day-ahead capacity calculation with regulatory approval of the DACCM and explanation of Central Europe DACCM and outlook. So I don't know if the colleagues who are presenting are here.
I'm not sure who from NRAs is presenting. Okay.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Clément Poet. I'm working for CRE, and I was leading the process with Stefano Rossi for Marera for the approval on NRA side. So we have just a short slide, just to say that we unanimously agreed to approve the Central Europe capacity calculation methodology. First, big thanks to the CTSOs for the fruitful discussions during the 6 months process. And we believe it's an important milestone to be reached. So the next steps, first, something maybe not so important for market participants, but on a regulatory level, we will proceed with the national process to formally approve the methodology in the coming weeks. On TSO level, now it's time for the implementation. So for maybe the next big milestone, we have set an ambitious implementation deadline for the capacity calculation go live of mid-January 2028. And in this regard, we will continue working with TSOs toward the implementation of the capacity calculation. So happy to take any questions, but I think that now TSOs will present high-level elements regarding the methodology.
No question on this point so far? I think you can go ahead then.
Maybe just to circle back when the question was raised during the roadmap, that there was some confusion, 1 year delay, but this is the first formal deadline that we have. So it really sets the basis. So we cannot in this context speak about the delay. It's based on the exchanges with the regulators. but now the ambition has been set January 28. Right.
Thank you. I think then we have our slides to be presented by other colleagues, maybe not you, Clément.
It's Lucas and
Yeah, indeed.
Okay,
I think
perfect.
Lucas
Yeah.
will take over.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Lukas Wachter-Kollmann. I work for APG, and I'm one of the conveners of the Central Europe DHET-PT. Yeah, and I'm happy to present once again the highlights of the new approved CE DHET CCM. We wanted to use this opportunity of the first CE methodology to reiterate the main concept that changes. And give you a bit of an overview and also an outlook of what will happen next. So as a short reminder, the Central Europe CCR, as most of you will already know, is the merger between Core and Italy North. So one of the major changes compared to the status quo is that Italy North will be part of the flow-based environment, but also Switzerland will be integrated as the so-called integrated technical counterparty, which should further improve the coordination between the core and then CE region with the Swiss capacities and the Swiss grid. So the main objective for the CCM is the same as for all the other CCMs, I would say. So it will ensure non-discriminatory treatment. It will be transparent and a coordinated process across all the TSOs. And it will also ensure that the minimum capacity requirements, the 20% within the region, but also the 70% min-must target will be respected in the new CE CCM. The main conceptual difference compared to the core flow-based methodology, which was, of course, the blueprint for our new methodology, is the integration of Switzerland. While, of course, Switzerland right now is still not part of SDAG and the market coupling. That's why a different process was needed, but still with the goal to, as much as possible, integrate and coordinate the capacity calculation process. For the market parties, what to expect? The outputs delivered to the NEMOs will be very much the same as for core. So there will be at least the same level of transparency and data publication as you all know from the core process. And we expect with the new Central Europe DHET CCM to have a more consistent, more harmonized rule across the whole region, and also to improve the coordination in terms of capacity calculation for the day-ahead timeframe. If you could go to the next slide, please.
Sorry, but I've got a question because you mentioned transparency. There's an important thing for us in Italy, which is allocation constraints. So we need the allocation constraint, actual allocation constraint that goes into the problem, which is not the case at the moment. So don't forget this. I mean, in the core, we have the allocation constraints. It's explicit. In the case of Italy, it's not fully explicit.
Yeah, I was not sure to get all the question. I think this is related to the allocation constraints of Italy, of Terna. Maybe I could give this question to Ferdinando if he's in the call. But generally, the idea is to have the same level of transparency that is already foreseen now for the allocation constraint applied by PSE.
Maybe for the question, because I don't know, you have mics on your table or not?
No.
Oh, okay, maybe. Okay, thank you very much.
Now you have two blocks of X, which I don't think are read. You have the Savoy next, and then you have the ones next to each other. Eventually, we are the SS bridge the gap and have a continuous grid.
I did not get the question. I'm so sorry. Maybe we bring.
I think there's two blocks of connects. The plan of LTM, GS North, and so on. And then they have the ones that they added last year. And I don't think there is any link between the two. Does it mean that RT will have to provide a much larger portion between Italy and Ireland very later?
Italy and
then Ireland.
Ireland.
Yes, RT has very few connects today.
But with Celtic, yeah, well, I guess with Celtic is justified. Because the north-south, I don't think that's the.
I'm not completely sure.
Well, if you look at Elia's grid, if you look at Belgium, you will find almost all of Elia grid. If you look at the matrix from RT, there's historically the northern border. Then they added back something which at the beginning we had some of the Italian nodes, well, some of the constraints associated to Italy. Now we've got a bit more, we've got some in Switzerland, and that's all. But we don't have anything in between. Of course, the Italian part has always been the most important on the country. But are we going to discover something in the middle? There are some stuff with Spain as well, normally, which are quite important. So that's the question.
Yeah. But the question is whether more of the network of RTE is included in the domain. That is the question. Okay. Yeah, Lucas, I'm not sure you can answer that question.
I mean, I cannot speak for RTE, of course. It's the responsibility of each TSO to include or not include specific network elements into the capacity calculation. But I would expect the connects that are now relevant for Italy North be then part of Central Europe.
Yes, but the question is, will other connects be way more actually? You know, if you want to have a continuous grid which goes from Italy to Belgium to Switzerland to Italy.
And that's where there is a parallel run process part of the implementation. And so these type of effects, whether this is on RTE side or the effect of having Ternac part of the flow-based domain, that will all become visible during the external power run process. So I think that's just the normal way of setting up the implementation. I think underlying, and that's for me a very relevant message, is that it will lead to an improvement in terms of coordination, because today the flows have to be looked at from 2 dimensions, core dimension, Italy North dimension, and then it's kind of all integrated together, and we don't have to, you know, split upfront these flows anymore between the 2 regions. So in the end, that's the benefit of or the sheer benefit of moving to Central Europe, that will be very much better to do the coordination and let the market actually do the arbitrage, how the capacity on these connects, including the French connects, is to be allocated.
Yeah, for sure. But technically, the list of connects will be much longer than the sum of Italy.
There is no indication today to assume that. So let's see what the parallel one turns out.
That they put in the domain, but also everything they put in has to still pass the same threshold of sensitivity. So they can put all of them in, and so many won't be 5% sensitive to exchanges, and then they won't be considered. But if they are, then considered.
You have to be aware that 5% of course changes because you add more hubs, which could lead to more connects happening it, or less. True. But what can happen?
We also know from previous BT zone review that RT tends to not include enough, and when we start including many more constraints. So the risk is there. Also, another risk is the personal question, because I asked the question in time, why are the phase shifters not co-optimized to the problem? Because phase shifters are very similar to the way Allegro is modeled. So it's in parallel. And the complexity is increasing. So finding an optimal point, well, preempting the optimal point is going to be more and more of a challenge. So technically, can we please revisit having co-optimization of phase shifting?
What do you mean precisely with co-optimization of phase shifters?
It's not a decision variable of the phase shifter angular.
In allocation.
I mean, okay, that's actually a discussion outside the current CCM, but that's a principal discussion in CACM 2.0. Actually, if I can expend 1 minute on that, as I also happen to be in these discussions. So these remedial actions, the PSTs included, they are essential in the implementation of the 70% rule, because we are asked to use them to their maximum extent in order to see, can we maintain during the validation step the 70%. And so if you would not be able to do that anymore, and we have to move them to the allocation, then the validation step. So that's more the principal discussion around what does it mean to move these PSTs into the allocation. It means that you need to look at the consequences of the implementation of a consistent implementation of a 70% framework, including the use of these PSTs today in capacity calculation in validation.
The point with the PST is that the simplified representation of the PST, if you say this function which simplifications, and in terms of optimization, is easy. If you consider that you have only access to certain type position, then it's a leap, it's complicated. So, and given the number, then you can solve it. But if you say, let's simplify, and let's look, because it's like in a transmission planning, you can ask RT, it's represented. In transmission planning, you don't go for step changes. So I think as a compromise, because all what we're doing is a simplified representation of reality, so we could compromise on this, which makes the situation much easier. That's okay. I mean, putting that question a few times, and the previous answer was not really satisfactory because previous answer was, we looked at it, we can't do it. But planning tools is there, so that I did not understand. But that's
I want to say it's part of the remedial action set that is being used in capacity calculation. And when I was introducing before the coordinated validation step that we are implementing, this will also come along with coordination of these remedial actions. So PSTs will there be part of the game.
Is everything okay? Can we go forward with the presentation? I think there is a next slide then. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on. So in this slide, it's depicted, I think we have shown this once before, but this is the general concept, how we intend to integrate Switzerland, even though Switzerland is not part of the market coupling. So the general idea is that Swissgrid has or is fully integrated as any other CETSO up and including until the validation phase. So that means equal rights and responsibilities. Swiss connects will be considered, but also Swiss remedial actions to be optimized, and also the minimum capacity requirements apply to the Swiss connects. So in the capacity calculation process, we then end up with one common validated domain, including Switzerland, which is depicted on the top right corner. And then we need to split the capacity to be able to extract capacities for Switzerland. And we do this applying a sharing key, the so-called RS key, which is based in the methodology on the thermal capacity on the Swiss borders and the sensitivities, so the PTDFs on each CNEC. So we have a relative sharing key specific for each hour and for each CNEC. And then we end up with this extraction domain on the left side, and then we perform an NTC extraction that calculates the NTCs in the market likely direction, and we improved the, I would say, the general NTC extraction in order to ensure a fair share that is reached on average for all the relevant CNECs, and in the end have NTCs in the market likely direction for the Swiss borders, and also consider the allocation constraints on the border between Switzerland and Italy. Then, once we have calculated the NTCs, they are considered in the final domain for the that is provided to ESSAC by including the impact of those NTCs. And one thing to mention is regarding the non-likely market direction. There we will provide default NTCs because, of course, also for the Swiss market, NTCs in both directions need to be provided. And with this approach, it's ensured that we have a common starting point for the whole capacity calculation, and Switzerland is integrated to the maximum extent possible, but still end up with NTCs for the Swiss day-ahead market and the flow-based domain for ESSAC. And if we now move to the last slide, where we have a bit of an outlook, what's coming up next. After the approval of the CE day-ahead CCM, we are already in the phase of drafting the first amendment. This is mainly necessary in order to incorporate all the changes that are currently foreseen in the core fourth day-ahead amendment, and also to update the respective article that deals with the leftover capacity calculation for the intraday timeframe, the IDCCA part, as this is currently evolving in core, and we need to update also our methodology to be consistent with the subsequent intraday methodologies that, at least for the time being, will be still in core, respectively, in Italy North. And Steve already mentioned the parallel run. We, of course, will have then a better understanding of the impact of the whole merger. And also, specifically, we will reassess the parameters that are relevant for the Swiss integration, which is the relative sharing key, and also the potential relieving effect of the NTCs. And the first results will be available in the external parallel run in Q3 2027. And as mentioned by Clément, the go-live date for the methodology is now planned for January 28.
Sorry, what do you mean by potential relieving effect of entities? The counter flow you are talking about?
Sorry, I did not. Yeah.
What do you mean exactly by potential relieving effect of entities? Is it counter flows you're referring to?
I'm not sure what you exactly mean by counter flows, but the general idea is that during the process of the capacity calculation, we don't know yet how much of the Swiss capacities are really nominated and firstly allocated. And that's a question then if we can assume safely that a specific portion of it is nominated, so we can take not only the burdening effect of the NTC, but also the relieving effect of the nominated NTCs into account or not. So that's something we will investigate during the parallel run.
Hello, Andrzej Stańczyk, Energy Traders Europe. I would like to ask about whether this process of including Switzerland into calculation is foreseen on the basis of agreement between the EU and Switzerland, or is it independent? So let's say the negotiations stall or are cancelled if you still can rely on the process.
So it is foreseen that we have an agreement between the CETSOs and Swissgrid, the so-called ITCP agreement, but this is a different agreement than what is currently in discussion on political level with the whole Stromabkommen discussion. And My assumption is that once the political there is a political agreement, the way is clear that Switzerland is fully integrated in the, or can be fully integrated in the market coupling, and then this special process where we need to derive entities for the Swiss market is no longer needed. But until Switzerland is fully integrated in the market coupling, we need a specific process, and for that there will also be an contractual framework.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there other question in the room or online? Don't hesitate to raise your hand as well. Yes,
maybe one question, not precisely regarding the flow-based domain, but more regarding the hourly resolution and 15 minutes resolution of entering the markets and the ahead capacity calculation methodology. There are differences, and we as market participants might be afraid that we might experience paradoxically rejected offers due to different time horizons of calculations and internal bids within the bidding zone. If I was clear enough, I can give you examples.
So no, it did. So the intention is to have exactly as now in core an hourly granularity for the capacity calculation.
The coupling process relies on capacity calculation methodology, and for reliable coupling process, everything should be harmonized. Today we have different time frames. Internally, in one bidding zone, market participants put their bids according to their portfolio needs. On one hand, consumption forecast, on the other hand, generation forecast, incorporating a lot of renewables. And this time frame of 15 minutes is much more vivid. It takes into account a lot of real-time situations. While they had capacity calculation methodology still calculates only on hourly resolution corridors for this coupling of biddings or within Euphemia algorithm, or all the bidding books, or how do you call it? And now we feel some differences, and if we don't have enough capacity available for all exact needs for one particular bidding zone, we might feel that a lot of internal bids could be paradoxically rejected without being fulfilled within one single bidding zone, because the corridor is not harmonized enough to be fully complied with maybe some complementary needs from other bidding zones.
The allocation does have the full flexibility to allocate the capacities on a 15-minute basis.
Allocation, but what's in which horizon does power exchanges, or do power exchanges get the corridors for the coupling process, in hour or in 15 minutes?
Well, the capacity calculation input is the same input for all the 4 quarters.
It is the same, and within 1 hour there are different needs. This is exactly the problem which you has.
The different needs are reflected in the bids,
Yes.
and the allocation will determine the flows upon a 15-minute basis. So the capacities are allocated on a 15-minute basis.
They are the same within 1 hour, or not? Are they the same within 1 hour?
What is the same in 1 hour?
All those 15 minutes allocation or corridors.
The same values, you mean?
Yeah, the same values.
Ah, okay.
Same domain.
Yeah, of course.
Domain is being calculated on hourly resolution, or in 15 minutes resolution. In which resolution? In hourly resolution. Yes. And our bits, market participant bits, have been transformed into 15 minutes resolution. And we may use one cross-border capacity only for one specific situation in one 15-minute block, and use other parts of this hour, 3 15-minute resolutions that could be more efficiently used if the domain is being calculated on 15 minutes resolution. You know, if everything is harmonious in 15 minutes, the flow-based domain, then everything is much more efficient. Capacity is more efficient to use.
I'm not sure this is kind of a straightforward conclusion, because it's a different question with respect to flexibility in allocation on 15-minute basis, and what is the rationale to do a capacity calculation with a grid model in a 15-minute MTU basis.
I don't use the existing capacities, the existing power lines.
But this is what we've done in the allocation already. And the capacity calculation is full of assumptions. So I have a bit the impression that there is kind of a perception that you can move to a much more accurate representation. Last, you have to see this in the general context of all the inputs that are going into the capacity calculation. So that I would not personally say, okay, this is so straightforward to conclude that there is something to gain there.
There is no consideration of moving to 15-minute calculation anytime soon.
No.
No. Okay.
What we can do, because I feel that there are different perceptions around that, is just exposed from the meeting, just come back to the question to clarify it from our end. The answer.
What would help people to understand the situation is explaining exactly how you build the grid model, what are the assumptions, and people could see that some of the assumptions to see the position of the system. And as we move into the 15 minutes framework, we've got very strange situation, as we can see in the prices. So we are in kind of a hybrid situation between intraday and daily behavior. So if you look at the prices from a hardware perspective, they look the same as before. If you look at 15 minutes, there's very strange things. We'll see if it changes, but I guess for you, it's a challenge if you were to, because I think there are some implied flows which are quite different from what we had before. Some extreme behavior on the first quarter, on the last quarter of the line. But it's a challenge. I don't think you need to do a good study at 15 minutes compared to the volume of assumption that you are taking. It's irrelevant.
And I think the observation that you make, that there is now some transition phase in the use of 15 minutes with the sawtooth and all these effects, that is fully the result of how the bits are being sent. So this is not the effect of the capacity calculation. Perhaps it's a good observation and a question to share in the MCCG next week, because there you can discuss the allocation effects. Here we cannot help you further with that.
Thank you. Any other question on that topic or on the slides as well? Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very comprehensive as well. If there are no questions, maybe we can see. There is a last slide, or on the 13th?
No, that's already.
It's the break slide.
Yeah.
Perfect. Then I propose to go to the break, and we'll rejoin at 10:30. Thank you very much.
Really?
No, it's yeah. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Here in the room, everybody is trying to find a seat again. And we will resume the Core and CE consultative group with two topics, basically. We are in the core context now, and two topics that are interlinked. So first we start with a long-term capacity calculation and the day-ahead capacity calculation and removal of LTA inclusion. Yeah, the idea is to start off with long-term to set the scene, and then we can, discuss it in an integrated way. Patricia, you will be presenting long-term. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Hopefully everybody can hear me also online and perhaps in the room. So as Ruth said, and also Veli at the beginning, thank you very much. We have a couple of topics connected to long-term capacity calculation to be presented today. Since we saw each other in the first half of 2025, many things changed. So in line with the feedback from core NRAs, we, for TSO, stopped the initiative for the temporary ATC extraction trap. And we are now fully focused on the go live with the flow-based capacity calculation and LTFBA switch in November 2026. And I believe this is no surprise to anyone. So today I would really like to walk you through some of the status update and where we are in terms of the implementation timeline, some of the stakeholder management milestones as well. But it's quite important, and where we still see market participant feedback is the LTCCM consultation that is currently ongoing until I believe next week. And obviously I'd really like to introduce some of the key concepts and the technical explanation of the proposal. And then what is also rather important, or most important milestone for market participants, is the external parallel run. I will give you a short introduction and a teaser for what we're planning in the external parallel run scope. There will be also a dedicated workshop later on this year, organized together with LTFBA, where more information will be provided. But hopefully today you will get a rounded overview of what LTCC currently goes through in terms of implementation and next steps. But as mentioned, the full focus is currently on the flow-based switch, both for capacity calculation and allocation, and I will focus then on the capacity calculation mainly. Also, following the feedback we received from market participants, Acer, NRAs, TSOs worked on measures, how to improve the LTCC flow-based domains to make sure that there are stable inputs for the allocations once we go live. For this, we worked on the amendment for the core LTCCM. This was to accommodate these improvements, and this improvement is really about tuning the flow-based domain using the benchmark that is based on historical offered capacities. So I think this is something that we gathered also from previous exchanges with market participants and especially with regulators. This LTCCM amendment is also vitally connected to the capacity calculation methodology amendment and the one for intraday as well, and especially to the removal of LTAs. So we would be then decoupling the physical from financial world, and that would be enabled via this amendment as well. Obviously, as said, we are nearing the go live in November 2026, and for this we would really like to offer market participants I would say a quite long external parallel run, so an experience with what does it mean to calculate flow-based domains for long term, how does it look then in allocation, and this would be then aimed for the end of November 2025. So we would like to launch it with a yearly capacity calculation and then continue until they go live in 2026. This will be also including the improvement. So whatever we are now consulting in the LTCCM should be then also put in place for the external parallel run, so you can actually see the effect. So as said, we will go through the details of the LTCCM amendment, also update on the roadmap and the key milestones.
and one of which is also the external power run. I would really like to remind that we value feedback from market participants, and it's really what's sort of guiding us forward. Very happy that we can exchange here on the benchmark application and also on the LTCCM amendment. And then if you have any questions or any remarks for the external power run, that will be also very helpful to offer you the best experience in the coming year. Maybe Brent, if we can go forward.
Just a brief question. We have seen at JAW's website, there is a kind of simulation testing phase for long-term allocation.
Yeah.
But we haven't seen all the grid models. Only a few grid models, mainly for Benelux area, not for the rest. Or maybe you have put something recently.
So the simulation platform testing, it's somewhat separate from the external file run. From the core TSOs, we supplied the entire domain for the core region. So I'm not sure what CGMs you're talking about, but the domain for yearly and monthly capacity calculation covering the entire area was included. I can have a look at the Java message board whether I can still find the messages. Maybe to also connect the dots. So the simulation platform will be available for market participants for a longer period of time. So that's basically a sandbox where you guys can also play. The external file run will be more about receiving the published results and not active bidding, but the simulation platform will be then made available upon registration.
Will they use the same grid model or not?
They will use the same domain. It may use the, yeah. Okay, perfect. Thanks for the question. So if we can then go forward. As promised, we will delve into the improvements and what they mean, how they are actually connected to LPCC capacity calculation, and then also the methodology itself. So the increase of the flow-based domain through benchmark is very much connected to the removal of LTA inclusion in day ahead. So I said by this removal of LTA inclusion, TSOs aim to produce the product that is really financial. So the financial transmission rights would not have any connection to the operational security after this removal. But at the same time, the flow-based domain increase through benchmark is basically an adjustment of the flow-based domain that allows to reach a domain that can accommodate historical offered capacities from the past. And that was also one of the questions. So how did we come up with the numbers for the benchmark? These are the historical capacities offered in Java auction 2024 for yearly and an average for monthly with several exceptions. So this is something that should offer capacities that are stable and also reflect the historical situations. So providing stability in the offered volumes for hedging, this is really something that we would like to aim for whilst transitioning to flow-based allocation. So going towards something that is a bit more maybe market-oriented and volatile with stable flow-based domain. This benchmark is also aligned with ACER and NRACE. So in this sense, there was strong regulatory guidance to offer stable conditions to market participants. And there is also a maximum cap for the benchmark to mitigate unwanted financial exposure, because obviously when we remove then the LTA inclusion from day ahead, obviously to keep the proportion between long-term and day ahead domain, there has to be some sort of mechanism, and this is then the maximum cap introduced by the benchmark. As said, the purpose of the inclusion, the LTA inclusion removal is to decouple the LTCC process from the operational security and shift to financial products. This is foreseen in the 4th amendment of day-ahead CCM and 5th amendment of IDCCM. The LTA inclusion removal was introduced in the context of the minimum capacity requirements in day-ahead capacity calculation as well. So I would believe that it is an enabler, but it also has a slightly different meaning. But it was very important to mention here that we are actually undergoing a paradigm shift. So maximization of capacity subject to operational security is now shifting more towards a financial forward market, and that there is a trade-off how much day ahead congestion income should be used to enable hedging. So basically, we are not looking at operational security risks, but rather revenue adequacy considerations. Laura?
Looking at the whole thing, there are different points of view, I must admit. We have risk. We have risk mitigation and hedging. How to minimize the risk. And what is the real risk? Operational security. We all should minimize and prevent potential blackouts. Speaking from long-term perspective, we need to mitigate and avoid to fulfill all portfolio needs only on the day ahead plan. Very difficult to mitigate the risk only on a 1 day ahead stage. Another thing, moving from physical world into financial world and having all long-term allocations being put only in one single day causes a huge financial cost for market participants. Looking from our perspective, we really did the new paradigm and we enlarged the risk for market participants. We haven't prevented them. And we know it's very difficult to maximize the existing capacity, the existing infrastructure without building new ones with the same coupling process and with the same flow-based domain. But looking at long term, if we use 2-year-old topology and grid model for the upcoming year, we could make a big mistake. And we have seen this in the table presented last time during the course CG, in which we saw huge and dramatic reduction in long-term capacities for many borders, especially for the region between Hungary, Austria, Slovenia, which highly impacts Croatia and other, I would say, peninsulas in this EU. Yeah. And it's really difficult for us in upcoming month to decide what to do, how to bet when we bet in different capacities in order to survive in the market, to stabilize our portfolio and the grid at the same time, and to have enough capacity on the day ahead. When we have huge volatile processes with the new renewables, with the new load curve behavior, with the price volatility. How to mitigate this risk between the different sources, different time frames, only on the day ahead line. It seems that long term doesn't help us at all. And the security of supply that you need to distribute the risk evenly in different time horizons.
I will try to react to what my expertise is, whatever is not and is maybe broader, because I would believe that you are also talking about shifting from physical transmission rights to financial, and what is then what does hedging actually mean?
Yes.
Yes. But that's maybe also for coffee and lunch. I would say we can just stay here forever and lament about it. But I fully get you, and we understand from TSO's side that the LTFPA and the flow-based introduction in long term is also making it even more volatile, while it should be quite stable. And I'm very happy that you mentioned the numbers that we showed last time, because those didn't include the benchmark. And then the benchmark, at least for the offered capacity, is the enabler, is the sort of the mechanism to stabilize at least one part of the process, to make it stable, predictable, and in the essence of the benchmark, override the capacities that TSOs didn't really have any control of, because it was really driven by the CGMs or any other inputs. And now the benchmark should actually offer the same capacities as were offered in the past. And then obviously, as market participants, you can influence via bidding and maybe some bidding strategies how the allocation results will look like. But for that, from LTCC perspective, we do not really, or we cannot really influence the allocation part at the moment. The only thing we were able to come up with and we are able to offer to market participants is the stable flow-based domain that is predictable, should accommodate the same capacities you are used to today with several exceptions on several borders. But I do agree that the pure flow-based domain that was so sensitive to number of timestamps, CGMs, topologies, whatnot, was really different from what you are used to, especially in the region of Hungary, Croatia. With the benchmark, now the values should be what you know today and should be also reflective of day ahead and what is then offered in the day ahead.
And
I will not enter.
Topology. We need to have updated topology. For instance, APG managed to finalize the 380 EV circle. And if you use the old topology, then that
always use the new topology. So every year we take the latest CGMs that are built over the summer, currently being merged, validated, and also the outages. We take all of this, and whatever does not fit the benchmark, so basically the historical capacities get updated in the capacity calculation process in order to produce a domain that is reflective of topology changes and topologies, and is also reflective of the sort of the usual need for hedging.
What about accuracy? Accuracy is one fuzzy word. Sometimes it's being put in ENTSO-E as the real process, and there is an accuracy team.
Yeah.
And how does it work with LPA?
Yeah, I'm also turning maybe to Steve a bit.
I feel we are driving away from the core of the discussion.
So there is.
Yeah, I want to circle back to that, because in all of the discussions that we are having around the forward markets, also in relation to FCA 2.0, etc., for me, all the signals I've been seeing also from market party side is that we should stop talking about operational security, and we should start talking about financial forward markets. The message was also repeated yesterday in the MESC. So I maybe would like to check in with market parties if it's controversial that we are putting ourselves into this paradigm shift, because now we're getting conflicting messages. So maybe an open question, is it an understanding that we are moving to financial forward markets and that should be guiding us in the decisions to take and the setup of the capacity calculation? Because you made your point, and you're in the operational security view, and I understand because you also have some PTR, particular border in the region, which is more the exception, if I can put it that way. But from a general perspective, and I see some people in the call who are following all of these discussions as well in the other fora, could we have some further reaction from market participant side on that?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Arnaud, and his hand raised.
Yeah.
Yes, if I could just quickly add to the discussion here. So from energy, so from our perspective, the way we look at it is, I mean, first of all, we're coming from a place where we've seen historically, lately, price spreads increasing across the whole core region. I think it's been highlighted quite well in the latest ASOS reports. So we have increase in spreads, and for us, what we see is there's two ways to mitigate that. The first would be on the day ahead in the shorter markets, making sure we have enough capacity to essentially reduce those spreads. And we know it's been difficult. We have the MINRAM and we have these IVAs and the reductions. So it's not always been the easiest way to do it, or we can then hedge the spreads. And that's really the discussion here on LTTR. And so we know that those risks on congestion will not go away. And so on our side, we are quite cautious about the trade-off that these solutions that are being proposed here are introducing, and also the timing of those. Because we feel like at this point, we understand quite well what is the impact of removing the LTA inclusion. And in our view, this is factually a reduction in some of the capacities that we see in the long term. And so that should in principle be compensated by the LT capacity calculation being potentially able to offer even more on the hedging side. And this is where we struggle a little bit with the proposal to really understand what are the benefits, and are we even going to get the same level or more additional capacity with the proposed approach. The ATC approach was clearly subpar with what's proposed today, so I think it's clearly an improvement, but it's a question a bit of timing. We discussed the 70%, the ROSC processes are coming, but they're not going to be immediately materialized on the day ahead. And we feel like in that transitional phase, on the day ahead, we still will have tightness. And it's a bit the question of removing LTA and not necessarily offering more hedging volume being a bit of a problem for us in the coming years.
And when you are saying this, are you having the finance perspective in mind or the operational security perspective in mind? When you say hedging against spreads?
So for us, it is a financial consideration, of course, but but
it
doesn't really.
And then we will come back to the question on the LTA inclusion removal, but I just wanted to check in on what paradigm we are looking at the topic. Okay, but then I get you're also looking at from a financial point of view. I see some more hands, Jerome and Michael in the chat.
Just one question actually, because the benchmark, so what is written here is the benchmark is 25. Does it mean that we freeze time in 25 and that forever? Because the methodology is based on the MCC reference. So if you add new grid elements or you change something, do you upgrade the benchmark? Or what is the idea of that?
Yeah, indeed. So this is also future proofing in a sense. So in the methodology, we introduce a review process that can kick in every year to assess whether the benchmark is still effective, especially if the head is evolving and there's something going on. There are new grid elements, or we see that there are issues with revenue adequacy and the financial risk exposure. So there would be a mechanism how to update the benchmark, and obviously we feel that 2025 might be a stable reference to begin with, because for 2026 that should still work. But if there are increasing capacities, or if we see that there are some bigger, say, new trends in the markets, we would be able to assess it from the TSOs, ideally with NRA involvement as well, to make sure that it's still relevant and effective.
We will come back to that topic when we dive into the benchmark and revenue adequacy.
Myself, that's for sure, but it was a good question. Thank you.
But Jérôme, would you?
Yeah, maybe because I think Steve kind of called up for industry views. Just first point, this forum is open to all market participants. So my assumption is that we and Zeli in particular brings together market participants. The fact that we have different people around the table also can present a variety of views. So I think that's fair. From the perspective of an organization like us, Energy Traders Europe, where we try to look at things from the broader European perspective, and in this case, the core perspective, and considering not that we really like the idea of long-term flow-based allocation to start with, but considering the general push that there was around that coming from the regulatory side, it looks like the direction in which you're going, considering the existence of forward transmission rights on all the borders except Croatia, Slovenia, seems to be a rational, at least path for research. And so I'm eager to hear more from Patricia, because I think we haven't really let her kind of explain really what's behind all this and what's the logic behind the different elements. Indeed, there are plenty of questions also around, making sure that we're switching to something that makes the finances of the financial transmission rights and the collection of congestion rates, etc., work also with what's happening for the TSOs in the day-ahead market. There are questions for us around the maximization of capacity still in the forward market, around making sure that this doesn't harm like financial firmness of transmission rights, etc., etc. But I'm keen to hear more about this before we dive into kind of challenging the framework.
Okay, thanks, Jérôme. Michael?
Yeah, talking for EFIAC Europe. So the consumers, we of course have to come with a nuanced position. In the past, operational security was sometimes given an interpretation that was quite stringent, so giving very little cross-border capacity, not to say on some borders zero. Ruud, I think you remember the time when Germany, Netherlands had 0 megawatts in the forward market. So sometimes it was interpreted in a too stringent way, which is not good, because for industrial consumers, hedging is very important. In order to make it able for us to close positions for our products, which I think is very much relevant now today, because we have to look ever more forward with the kind of framework that is put onto us. This being said, there is a trade-off for consumers, because like you also mentioned on the slide, there is a trade-off how much day-ahead congestion income you can use to enable this hedging. And this is where the nuance for the consumers is much more, the position of the consumers is much more nuanced. Because of course, for the others, it's easy to spend the day-ahead income for them to have more hedging opportunities for the sake of trading. But for us, that day-ahead income otherwise can be allocated to lower the tariffs, which are increasing. There are massive investments in the grids. You're talking about hundreds of billions of euros. I see all the reports of the TSOs, and each year there's hundreds of billions more. Yeah, it's important to have a forward market. It's important to have hedging, but I would rather try to keep a balance and avoid that the paper forward market becomes so big and so far out of sync with the physical world that the impact would be borne by the consumers through the tariffs. And so there's really a trade-off. So it's nice to go towards a new paradigm, but also on the new paradigm, there have to be some limits. And it has to be ensured that this is not at the detriment of the prices for consumers, so that everybody can trade everything around, and in the end, the invoice goes to somebody else. And so that's really where we want to make a firm position. And then operational security, like I said, in the past, it was sometimes given an interpretation that was a little bit too stringent. On the other hand, the physics are the physics. So in real time, you can only do what the grid can do. And then you can go further. And that's what we have been doing for many years to ensure with flow-based that you rather look at what are the real physical limits of the grid instead of having an artificially calculated value that might or might not have had any relevance to the cross-border capacity. But the operational security in the end, in the real time, and is really when you come beyond the balancing, even in the real time, that's where you have to ensure that. And so everything has to trickle down from the forward market to that real time, real physical solution, and we do not want to be exposed to a huge financial impact on the tariffs. I repeat myself, but a huge financial impact on the tariffs because this was not done in a diligent way. But I think you know my position on this. I mean, it has been the same position for many years. I'm happy to see that there is a paradigm shift. I don't know if I want to go full-fledged towards the new paradigm. I think also there we have to see what works and how the risks and the costs can be and the benefits can be allocated to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. It's good to have that perspective as well. Steve, do you want to respond to it?
And that's exactly what we are putting forward here in our discussion. So that's what we are saying. We should not simply over issue LTTRs because there is the trade-off to be made, and it is about how the congestion income is spent, and the TSO should not be speculating with that. And there I feel in our conversation we need to be clear about the connotation we give to physical and operational security. Operational security, that's a world that we know from the short-term markets and the remedial actions and all of the details and the grid model quality around it. Here, when you talk about congestion income, there is indeed a physical aspect still to be taken into account, but it's looking at the grid as the maximum that you could issue in terms of LTTRs, because you could not get more of congestion income out of this grid. But it's still with this euro perspective in the end. And that is what we try to explain. This is how we see the trade-off. And this is how we want to implement this benchmark, keeping this trade-off in mind, that we are not over-issuing LTTRs, for which we know that we will not have the congestion income to pay them back. Because then we would start doing speculation.
If I might react to that, Steve, yes, but there's also going to the limit of how much congestion income you might collect. And then using all that, and then if you're wrong in that, then the invoice goes to the consumers. So there's maximizing and there's the maximum maximizing. So it's really, there is a trade-off. And there is a limit to the point where it's just using congestion income to enable forward markets and hedging, which is important for consumers. And then pushing really the limits where you might put the invoice at somebody else's place. So it's, like you say, it's not speculating with the congestion income. And that's a very fine line where I hope that regulators also take this into account when they make decisions. So where to put the line. And I think the line might shift over time as we get more experience and we get more data points and so on. Because now it's, I mean, you have some models, and we know that some models are wrong, and some models are very wrong, and no models are ever correct. And so it's really for us very important to avoid that you swing completely into the other direction to the maximum level immediately. So that is a gradual approach, and then we also see how much experience we can get out of it. At the same time, trying to get as much as possible capacity in the forward market. But compared to some other actors, we are a little bit more prudent. Because we know where the invoice will be put at the end. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for these inputs. There is also a hand in the room.
Yes.
Can you speak up?
Consideration. I don't think that the physical and financial market are separated. Somehow the physical will calculate in the financial. You have seen it 2 weeks ago where Germany was paying about the value and in fact below because the market had anticipated the possibility of decoupling with 15 So, and I think there is an extra and somehow if the market anticipates that there will be less capacity with the year because there is no flow due to the LTA and longer, there will be some risk premium that people in the forward market. And you could say, okay, that's life and somehow equilibrium, equilibrium, but in reality there is an information signal. You know way more than the market how often this the payments can happen. So the market which can overestimate them because if they can happen at value.
You all miss one very important market. It's called capacity market. There are capacity remuneration mechanisms individually produced in different bidding zones in different member states, and they are not harmonized. And we all feel every day congestion cost, not congestion income, congestion cost from market participant side. And we have to take a loan from the bank to pay this cost. And all our superiors says, till when? When can we finally have one single market, one single grid that could finally avoid those congestion? Because that congestion cost or congestion rent should be finally spent not only for remedial actions, very costly remedial actions, but also for new interconnectors and bidding zone reviews and everything else. Something that we finally see as a result, not as a promise, unfortunately.
And so this confirms that indeed there is a trade-off to make because the congestion income is also to be used for, as you pointed out, with investments. The rest of the discussion, we can structure it in two parts. Part one is the benchmark and making the link back to the trade-off, what it concretely means, revenue adequacy. And the second part is then what is the impact on the capacities with removal of LTA inclusion. And for this, we also have, I believe, slides from market participant side and from TSO side. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Let's go ahead, Patricia.
Okay, so then hopefully I will be able to explain what we are aiming to implement in order to strike some sort of balance between maximizing hedging or providing stable hedging and the day-ahead congestion income revenue adequacy. So maybe if we go to the next slide then, Brent. The sort of tool to actually have this in place is the LTCCM. So the current LTCCM was reviewed and we propose as TSOs an amendment. This amendment, besides the benchmark introduction, also covers the IRGIT integration. So that's one more box to tick, and some minor points to ensure consistency of the methodology. So I would say rather clean up. But what is really important, especially in the context of the discussion and the questions we received, is the benchmark introduction and the adjustment mechanism that we are proposing. And that's a new article. So Article 10A, it describes the ATC benchmark, how it's set, how it's defined, what sort of adjustments we are introducing in terms of RAM recalculations on CNEX, etc. So it has some impact on the implementation as well, and the computation of RAM described in Article 14. Then obviously we would like to publish the benchmark, so Article 20 will be or is actually amended as well. And then, as said, the ATC benchmark will be also included in the methodology in an annex. So that should be as straightforward as possible, and also providing transparency to market participants. Besides that, I'd say connected to what Shane also mentioned, IRGIT inclusion. So obviously to have IRGIT and the new interconnector embedded in all the methodologies, we also introduced changes to several articles. It's mainly connected to inputs and how to deal with an HVDC line. And then I think this is just a high-level overview. If we delve into Article 10A and 13 especially, Brent, if we can go to the next slide. So my aim is really to introduce what benchmark means, how it's defined. I think some of you already noticed that it is very much linked to historical capacities, both for yearly and monthly. We have some specific cases as well. And obviously I would also then guide you through the function of benchmark and how it works. But as said, the 2025 yearly and seasonal average monthly ATC values offered in JAO auction 2025 would be used as the historical benchmark. So this is really an input to the capacity calculation process. Obviously, this step process step would be then introduced where RAMs would be adjusted on CNEX to produce a flow-based domain that is capped by min ATC and max ATC value per border to accommodate the historical values. So in very simple words, the flow-based domain would be adjusted and rewritten where needed in order to stretch it in places where normally it would not be sufficient. I'd say majority of core borders are really reflective of the historical offered capacities in 2025. So we're taking the yearly auction 2025 and then the monthly seasonal average. So we are taking the seasons because obviously then the CGMs are changing over the seasons to make sure that the topologies are correct. And this then links to the respective months in the capacity calculation process. There are specific cases, however, for DEAT, the historical benchmark reflects the regulatory guidance we received. So we know that there were unprecedented capacities on this border, and with the coordinated capacity calculation, the conditions will change. Therefore, 50% of the historical value would be offered on this border. For Polish borders, there was no benchmark applied as per original guidance. Obviously, zeros are zeros for some of the borders, and 50% PSE aims to align with the national regulator and bring some values to the table as a benchmark. These will be also then included in the annex of the methodology at the end. But currently the exchange between the regulator and PSE is ongoing. For Slovenia, Croatia, the benchmark is firmly set to 500 megawatts for yearly and 150 megawatts for monthly to respect the intergovernmental agreement on this border. And this is then basically what we are aiming to embed in the methodology in some sort of sophisticated way. But this is mainly to ensure that the first amendment can actually operationalize this process, also for the external power line. So we have the historical values as a basis, but then we are also trying to see whether a range, minimum and maximum, could help to cap the domain from above, but also introduce a floor. So we have the range of capacity that obviously should serve to get some sort of sensitivity into the domain, but also make it as stable as possible and predictable. So there will be some adjustment of the historical absolute value along the process. So we are now offering 90% for the minimum ATC and 100 still something that we're trying to resolve in the regulatory discussion. So following the public consultation and the shadow opinion from regulators, we should know more whether the floor should be 90 or whether it should be 100 or whether the same number should be introduced for minimum and maximum. But the aim is to really have some sort of capping from both sides. And I said already before, this is very much linked to the LTA inclusion and removal, especially then the maximum ATC cap, because what we saw, if introducing only the minimum, it can push some borders to very high numbers, and this can then disrupt the revenue adequacy. And this is also something that we don't want. We've heard that regulators also see the risk there. And I think by increasing very much, we would be then also risking other things, and this doesn't really strike the balance. Therefore, the min ATC and max ATC. Some of the disclaimers, obviously, in the current methodology, we are consulting, not all the months are included. November and December 2025 is sort of pending, but for the final methodology, we would really like to include the entire data set. One more thing to mention, I think it's quite straightforward, but obviously this is about offered capacity. So this is what TSOs from core would be offering to the allocation, and then LTFBA, so always allocation result cannot be guaranteed by these capacities. We can only offer and influence what we offer basically, but then the allocation and the allocated capacities are not guaranteed by these values. It's really dependent on the bidding by market participants. I would hope there are no questions, because I would really like to continue and we can take the questions after I
let's do that.
After I get through at least slide 18 and 19, that would be nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so then Ben, if we can go forward.
Just one question. There's one principal coefficient, which seems like it can be changed. The only calculation in max and no computation, and then multiply by 1.5. Why?
Yeah, that's on the next slide actually. So if we can go there, yeah, exactly. So to make things even more complicated, we realized that, okay, it's good to have the historical benchmark as a starting point, but then we are obliged to apply splitting. And what happens in splitting is that in yearly, we would only offer then 80% of the historical benchmark, and it just goes against any sense and logic of benchmarking and domain. So then after some exchanges with regulators as well, we agreed that the benchmark would be inflated at the beginning of the process, so we can then cut it to actual 100%. So you would be getting the entire historical value, not only 80% of it for the trading, and that's why the correction of 125 as a very simple math was introduced along the process, because splitting is governed by long-term splitting rules methodology, which is outside of the capacity calculation actually. So yeah, this was yes. So good news is that after benchmarking, increasing the benchmark and splitting, market participants should get 100% of the benchmark at the end. But then this is also connected to the initial setting. So there are a couple of steps along the way. So we start with absolute value of historical benchmarks for borders, with the exceptions I already mentioned. Then the min and max ATC for yearly and monthly calculation is defined and calculated in the central tool. So this is at the very beginning of the process. And then we have the range of capacities we would really like to get out of the calculation. So once we have the flow-based domain computed without any adjustment, we would, as TSOs along the process, we would check then the connects and the ramps, and whether these ramps actually fit the induced flows based on the minimum and maximum ATC benchmark. So obviously, if it's too little, then it gets increased. If it's too much, then it's shaved off. And we have something that can fully accommodate the historical capacities, but at the same time, it's translated into flow-based parameters. And whenever else the connects and the ramps actually fit this range, they're not adjusted. So I think it's also good to have some of the connects that do not need to be adjusted, but whatever happens is fully automatized in the process. And then the final output is the flow-based capacity calculation domain that is within the range of these historical ATC values. As sort of a bridge to LTA inclusion removal, the max ATC benchmark is linked to revenue adequacy. So I think everybody understands that remuneration of long-term transmission rights only happens thanks to sufficient day-ahead congestion income, and we would really like to keep it that way. So there was some extensive assessment of revenue adequacy and what happens with different shapes and sizes of domains. How does it work for the LTTRs and the remunerations in connections to congestion income distribution. And the result is that only a capped domain with a sufficient max benchmark can actually facilitate this revenue adequacy and is stable, predictable, and it's also very important to mitigate this financial risk exposure for TSOs, but I would also believe that this is important from many other perspectives. On the next slide, we have some numbers.
Amendment, does it explain the how you compute the induced flows? Yeah. Induced flows, so I guess, is it you're looking at every single NTC and you only add the one having the positive impact on every line?
We're looking at every single connect, yes. And we are looking at, maybe if you go back to slide 18, there is the formula. So this is a simplified formula from Article 14. So we calculate the induced flow for the benchmark, and then we are looking at the ramps from connects from the domain we computed, and it's a comparison.
Yeah, but my point is that how is the induced flow computed? I mean, take all the NTC, yeah, and the one that are taking from the RAM, you are summing them.
Exactly. So we take the positive PTDF, yeah, call it technically, and then we sum up all the impacts of all the NTCs, and we adjust the RAM accordingly.
And the grid that goes through the we never touch the coefficient of cells. It's just the physical number that are changing.
Yeah, there is a visual image.
There is also a visual imaging.
I prefer much with images. The images they don't. But anyway, sounds interesting.
So maybe just to showcase what we did for the revenue adequacy assessment. So the benchmarking, especially the introducing minimum and maximum ATC benchmark, ensures that the long term remains proportionate to the use of congestion income for remunerations, and therefore it secures the revenue adequacy. So when we looked at the historical values from 2024, because those are quite relevant, we saw that the day-ahead congestion income with LTAs yielded some 77% of usage of this congestion income to remunerate the LTTRs. We are also looking at the hours throughout the year when the congestion income from day-ahead was not enough to cover these remunerations. And from TSO's perspective, and I would say also the money flow perspective, it would be ideal to sort of push this number as down as possible, but it's also about the overall pot, because we're now moving to core CCR sort of perspective when looking at the congestion income. So then if we look at especially the resulting percentage of the congestion income that is used to cover the LTTR's remunerations, we are around the range of 73 to 77% in normal scenarios. We obviously also tested the scenario where the max ATC, so the cap where it is not applied, and there you can see that I don't want to be dramatic, but the flow-based domain exploded somewhat. So there is 110% of the congestion income that would need to be used. So this is really inadequate, and I also understood from Mikhail that it's also not something that is wished. And in order to mitigate it, then the min-max ATC scenario was tested, and obviously without LTA inclusion in day-ahead, it then yielded 73% of day-ahead congestion income to be used to cover the LTTR remunerations. So this seems to be as a fair balance between having enough capacities, especially in the historical context, but at the same time making sure that the congestion income is sufficient and sufficient to cover the remunerations. Yeah, this should be maybe some sort of thermometer to understand whether the word proportionate, whether it's really there or not. Not sure whether there, yeah.
The simulation, the core in the new version, basically, it's dynamic allocation per border. So you use historical spreads. How do you define the quantities that will be long-term allocated and against which you're making computation?
We simulated LTFPA, so it comes from the simulation with historical bits. And basically there is one single allocation run for long term. We also recalculated then market coupling for day ahead without LTA inclusion. So we are able to then see what a pure day ahead flow-based domain would actually generate in terms of congestion income. And this is then what is compared.
You can add that because there are only succession, the current ones, and we have the problem that we don't have enough collateral. I mean, the whole problem that we won't be in the same way if we have to buy the whole direction of the same time, and then still discussion on.
This is fully understood. Whatever we are using for simulations is historical bits that are actually created and strategized with a completely different setup. And obviously, we can only estimate how it would look like with the current bidding behaviors. In the future, the behaviors will change, and hopefully the external parallel run will also then allow you to adjust and see how this will impact your
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, if I may also ask a quick question on the numbers here. So should we can we expect maybe some deeper numbers and more transparency around what has been studied there? So for example, here I see for me two effects that are a bit entangled at this point, which is we recompute the long-term allocation with the new approach, and we also remove the LTA. So when you first recompute the long-term capacities, how does that compare to the previous realized allocation, the LTA essentially? Are they lower? Were they higher? So is the effect that we have, let's say, a domain that explodes, is it because the capacity that you create in the long term are essentially bigger, or are they actually smaller than the past? And is the LTA removal that creates this financial exposure? For me, it's not super clear at this point, because I seem to remember that, okay, the approach that was actually mentioned still in the ATC extraction, but we essentially combine multiple flow-based domain from different days. So it was inherently risk averse, and we struggled to reach actually the historical levels. And so is that still the same approach that's being kind of used? Because I would tend to say that then we would be sticking to the 90% of the benchmark, so we would actually have less capacity offered. And that the fact that the congestion redistribution explode is maybe rather linked to the LTA. But it's hard to distinguish those two effects with the table here. So I don't know if you have the information, if that's something that you've done on different years also, because 2024 is, I think, it's a good start, but I don't know if this is like stable over time.
I'm also actually looking at the first half of year of 2025 to draw some comparisons, because we also know that whatever happens in day ahead then affects the congestion income. I mean, normally the long term should stay should be rather stable. Not sure, Steve, Ruth, whether we can supply some more answers to these questions also in writing, if that would be possible, like to give some explanation and logic of the computation and what we observe along the way.
Yeah, I think we can do that as part of the consultation answers. We need to anyhow make and publish a consultation report. And so I assume that the questions that you have are part of the input you will receive in the consultation. And then that's the place to come back to them.
Yeah, in fact, trying to understand the table, I still can't see. Probably me. So what I have in mind, if we do the comparison, is the first part, which is how much money you're getting from the long term, how much you're going to, what is the congestion rent you're capturing on a daily basis, how much of it you give back to the congestion rent owners, and how much is left. So in this table, I'm not sure where. So historical value, I guess the total LTTR, where is it? Is it the auction, the total amount from the auction? That one? Okay. And the next one is compared. So it's always, so that column is the revenue from the long-term auction. Right?
So it's a first and a third column which are relevant for this trade-off discussion that we are having on how much day-ahead congestion income is to be used. So the total amount of day-ahead congestion income, the first column, coming from simulations of the market coupling with the day-ahead domains as they are. And the third column is then, okay, based on the volume of the LTTRs that have been allocated, and that's then the other simulation that was performed, that based on the new methodology with the introduction of the benchmark and running the flow-based allocation simulations, we know how much LTAs are allocated on every border. And then we know, okay, with this volume of LTTRs on every border and the price spread that came out of the day-ahead market coupling, what's the amount of LTTR payback? So that's all behind the third column. And that's then maybe zooming out, the comparison or the comfort that we were looking for is to say, okay, we are not kind of shifting or tilting the balance, that we would all of a sudden start using way too much of day ahead congestion income and start being speculating. And that's the message from this slide, is that if we do not have the maximum, if we do not put a cap on the size of the volume of LTTRs in the long-term flow-based domain, then we would be in the second row and we would start speculating, because we would use more than the natural hedge of our grid, more than the day ahead congestion that we could expect already for paying out LTTRs.
Here we're in a framework where we keep this plus or minus 10%, and we say, okay, what's the impact when we have this one bound or the two bounds in there? Should we not also look at it from a sort of continuous perspective? What happens as we go along the line of removing or tightening the two bounds? Is there not, I don't know, you said we tested different things on your side, or what's the optimal? Do you have also, I mean, are the 10% the optimal numbers that that you think should be like discussed, or or do we have a view on a more continuous basis of how we move in either directions, including tight bounds or not? So because again, mean ATC for me, so 90%, if we say that the methodology inherently risk averse, this may end up having the capacities really even below the 100%. It may not, I don't know the numbers. And on the other hand, the max amount here, indeed, it keeps the percentage of daily head congestion returned relatively stable, but then should that upper bound not be something where we discuss also on what's the value that's lost on the LTA, and we maybe set a target on what's the percentage TSO should maximum return instead of having a flat 10%, which might sound a bit less dynamic. So, I mean, I don't know, I'm having these questions and it's not clear then how to answer with the table here.
And that's exactly the right question you put forward, because the max ATC is, we don't see it as it's a fixed parameter, but it's to be part of the feedback loop, so that we could steer the risk somehow, that we learned from, okay, what happens in 2026? If there we see that it was going to the upper side of use of the head congestion income, that we could set this max ATC parameter to a different lower value. And so this is kind of the control knot that we built into the methodology. How exactly, based on which criteria it will be steered, that is still indeed to be formalized, but it should somehow reflect the use of the day head congestion income. And that's part of also what is to be clarified in the further part of the amendment, also with the regulators, because I heard a couple of times it's also a regulatory question because it's taxpayers' money behind. So, but that's indeed exactly what's on the table.
And so that's where I think we have to be quite cautious, because then, of course, as was mentioned earlier, society cannot gamble on having more than 100% that TSOs have to be in an extremely tight situation. Yes. On the other hand, if that threshold becomes too low, I mean, the spreads on the head, they still exist. I mean, the risk is not gone. So then it becomes on us who's not able to hedge ahead. And it also trickles down to clients eventually. So it's really, the definition of these caps is kind of key, and you called it a feedback loop. And I wonder then, I mean, is it then going to be an ex post adjustment? So once we hit a wall and we see that there's tightness on the offering, then we change? Or will this be adjusted in a smarter way, in essence, where we try to predict how it's going to happen and the cap can automatically move? And for us, that's a bit the question, like how long after the facts will the cap be adjusted?
So, and that's in terms of expectation management, yeah. That is exactly all of the key design questions for FCA 2.0. How you do a more intelligent volume determination for your LTTRs, taking into account the expectations on the day ahead and the flows on the day ahead. So this is not the setting we are now in. Yeah. So this is all discussions for the target model to do things in a much more intelligent way. And here we are doing a very basic rough statistical approach. And so it's also a very basic rough feedback loop. So we can only look back at, okay, the past year or the past 9-10 months. So imagine we are in 2026. And in September, we look at, okay, what have we learned so far? Do we need to make an adjustment for the yearly auction 2027? That's practically how it would be implemented.
I mean, what is good is that even though this is a simplified sort of transitioning step towards something more sophisticated statistics as well, how we can maybe see the sort of dynamic element is that there are KPIs already produced today for the day-ahead congestion income usage in the standard report, so that can be monitored on regular basis, and there needs to be a continuous back check of, is the benchmark still effective? Is it too little, too much? We did some bracketing exercise with like different percentages. We started with 100, 110, 135, and this is where we were still around those 75%. The higher you go, it becomes a bit volatile. So I would say it's still not the most sophisticated method, but I would believe that the review loop could allow for adjustments when needed and where needed.
And would that be actually, because you were also trying to resolve that legally, could that be also like included, that actually there is like a revision process that
It is already it is already included in the draft methodology. It would be something that should happen, sufficiently in time for the next year's calculation. Should also consider, for instance, evolving topologies in certain way, but mainly for the max ATC benchmark, which should be linked to the revenue and equity and sort of keeping the temperature right.
Yeah. And so we are now at a stage where we put it forward. So we will get input from your side, we will get input from NOA side, and then it will have to find its way into a formalization in the methodology. So we don't have a conclusion yet exactly what is the criteria to be set. Is it like 60, 70, 80% of the congestion income and so forth? So we look at a certain direction, but we feel it's not just up to us to like say, okay, this is it.
And that's precisely what makes it difficult for us to really have a strong view, because we know we lose LTA, but because we do not have exactly a clear view of what's the effectiveness of the cap, where we exactly land in terms of percentages, it's a risk compared to a certainty that we have today. So that's what we see today.
Maybe because there's also hand raised on the Jerome. Thank you for your patience, and I hope we haven't lost the momentum for your question or your intervention.
No, it's good. It's really good. It's a good and super important discussion, and very good that people in the room have priority to speak, I think. No, I think one comment here, and kind of also like trying to bear in mind what Michael said earlier, also about like the other aspects of using congestion income. I think one of the things that is very useful in this slide is like not only the reference to the long-term to the day-ahead congestion income, but also to the congestion income from the allocation of the long-term rights, which shows that in both cases, also with just the minimum ATC, TSOs are not running into a financial situation where they dry out the congestion income, day-ahead and long-term combined. So I think this is also something to keep in mind in terms of what was just said earlier, like how could we potentially look at different scenarios with different boundaries, and maybe the min-max process is a way that ensures some form of greater assurance for the TSOs that they're not running into the ground with this, but then maybe with like more sensitivity scenarios will be something to think about. So that may be something that we'll put forward, or also for NRAs to think about in terms of like how they will handle the discussions with the TSOs going forward. So that was just like broad reflection. But then I had a question about something that was mentioned briefly in the previous slide, around the kind of socialization of the congestion income by the TSOs on this. And I was wondering if there had been already some decisions around it, like the keys for like the distribution of this, and if that would be made at any point public, or if this is something really internal to the TSOs. Yeah.
Michael, do you want to add to this, or?
Yeah, maybe it's better because the second part of the last question of Jerome is very relevant. I mean, because you look here at an aggregated level, but of course it's different if you look TSO per TSO, and it's important. I mean, thank you for making the slide. It gives some information. It's important to know how you do the calculation to really know what is included and what is not included in the calculation. But I want to state that it's not the point that consumers would have to pay through the tariffs for the forward market beyond what is the congestion income. On the other hand, there shouldn't be as much capacity given in the forward time frame as possible. And so there has to be a trade-off found, and it will be somewhere in the middle. So yeah, you switched the slide, but the min-max on the other slide, I don't know if it's the next one or the previous one, was yeah, this one. So it's interesting to see where you end up, but it's even more interesting to see how you come to the calculation. So what you take as a as elements for this calculation to have a full breakdown. And for me, Jérôme also asked the question is how the breakdown of this would be then, how TSOs would be exposed individually. And so how socialization would work on this one or not. Thank you. And then now you can answer it.
Well, I can tell from the socialization perspective and how we assess this in the context of revenue adequacy assessment. And obviously then Steve, feel free to add more. So with the move to LTFBA or LTCC, we are also then changing the logic of how the congestion income is distributed among TSOs, and this is all driven by the AAFs in the day ahead. So that's the allocated flows in day ahead, and it's really about what sort of burden we see on next coming from the allocations in day ahead, and how does this then distribute among TSOs. This same sharing, so we call it day-ahead sharing key. This day-ahead sharing key would then translate into long-term. So the long-term congestion income would be shared using the same logic. But we are also looking at the whole core CCR pot of money. So it's not the vision of single border and how much we collect and distribute there. It's really pot logic of the CCR and connect logic from the AAF perspective. Not sure, Steve, and on any of more of the sharing keys?
Not on a technical level, but on a principle level, we indeed, that's part of all these congestion income sharing methodologies. As soon as we have a coordinated long-term capacity calculation allocation in place, everything is looked at from what we call pot logic, so the regional perspective. So everything is put together, all the costs are put together, all the congestion incomes are put together, and what is then left after making this equation, it's only afterwards that you start distributing it back to borders/TSOs, all with the same sharing keys. And I think we are hitting here kind of the essence of a discussion we will be having in FCA 2.0, which is, does it make sense or not to be in this world of flow-based allocation where you are tied together in your risk management and in your setting the levels of risk that you accept. And this is the limitation we are in. We cannot say at the same time we are now doing everything in flow-based allocation and we want to do risk management border by border. So I understand the question behind, but I really feel this is a fundamental question for FCA 2.0 debate and not one that we will solve in this transitional solution.
The remark actually, because I'm trying to understand the delta between historical values and so in the DEL with and without the LTA. And so the property that it seems to have is that if you do the congestion value, basically, which is lambda times the transit on each line basically, is telling us that by reducing the runs, actually there's a trade-off between you're going, if you have got a tighter market, you're going to have wider spreads, but you're also transmitting less. What you're telling us is that in this simulation, it's actually better to transmit more despite having more compressed spread. But is that property is linked to 24? Is it always the case if you look at different months at different periods? Because I'm really wondering if the conclusion you are drawing is quite general, or if it's actually linked to the situation, to essentially the sensitivity of prices to quantities being exchanged locally. So that's a bit contradictory. I would have imagined that without LTA, by definition, we are more constrained. Without LTA is there for a reason, it's because we are too constrained. So
let's come back on the LTA and the head capacities because we still have some slides on that. And maybe a bit the preview there, it's not the game changer in terms of day-ahead capacities. So in the bigger discussion, there may be some nuances to make, but in the bigger discussion here, it's not the game changer for the day-ahead capacities, but it's the game changer for the way how we are, and you phrase it as conservatism in the approach for LTCC on how that is being managed. Because if you do it with the operational security clauses in mind, for sure, we will not have a stable long-term sufficiently sized flow-based domain. We will see everything coming out in the validation step based on a grid model, which is, 1 year upfront. It's very rough. It's very distant. And then we will end up with smaller, much more variable flow-based domains. And we will not be having this discussion on euros. We'll be having the discussions on what is inside this validation box. So that is more the determining factor for us when we look at volume determination for long term. And then specific question on what is the impact on day-ahead capacities. We will come back to it for after lunch.
Yeah, that's a good question now. For the momentum, it would be good actually to go on. But we could also make a break.
Pick up the key questions over lunch.
Yeah.
My part is more on the, if we were looking at the objective function, the version without any days more costly process. But here I was saying exactly the example. So, because the NDA, if it's there, if it's activated, and that is activated, that means you're funding the journal. So you're just making things cheaper, you're getting a better optimum. But here, you're not talking about the social welfare, you're looking at the congestion rate, which is a different question, which is not optimal congestion rate.
Exactly.
It's not optimized. So my point is that the behavior that we are having here, is it because of what we simulated? So if I look at December, if I do one conclusion, if I look at August, I will get another conclusion. That I don't know. Because it feels counterintuitive here, what we are getting.
But I think what I've heard a couple of times is that some more information about how we go to these numbers would be needed. We can also give maybe a comparison of years versus months and how does it work. Obviously, the metrics we are using here is the proportion of LPTR remuneration versus the head congestion income. So we can give a bit of more explanation and like showcase the conclusions from at least the partial scenarios. Not sure whether there are any other questions, because on the next slide there is a bit more meat to the bone, hopefully, on the review process and what we are aiming to do here. Obviously, as Steve said, there is no final firm conclusion on how the criteria will look like. But we know that there is a need to have a benchmark review feedback loop or a process loop. So in the LTCM already today, or in the amendment today, we envisage a mechanism for the annual update of the ATC benchmark in case the 2025 values cannot deliver expected effects, especially with regards to disrupted revenue adequacy, maybe significant changes in the topology and other internal and external circumstances for TSOs. So every year around September, we would really like to have this review process done, if need be, because there will be some regular and continuous monitoring of how effective the benchmark is. And it would indeed follow the logic of TSOs proposing, consulting NRAs, and then TSOs approving. I'd say good news is that whatever we do, however we would update the benchmark, this is then also published for market participants, so you would actually know what's coming, and you would know how to link then the results of the capacity calculation to the benchmark itself. The review process obviously requires some clarifications, as already mentioned. Sort of for the final submission of the methodology, we would like to clarify what sort of criteria are we assessing. Is it capacity related? Is it revenue adequacy related criteria? I would say the revenue adequacy really makes sense because of what we saw. And we are currently in the middle of clarification of what the process should be in its detail, what the criteria are we looking at, and also we're seeking some NRA and ENTSO guidance there. The timing and procedure of the updates, as I said, around September to really have it for the next yearly capacity calculation. And then we also need to agree on what is the exact NRA involvement there. So I would say having a static benchmark can be good for maybe the first run, and then we will need to see what's the actual effect of it. And in order to do this, we decided to have a benchmark review process in place that can really make sure that whatever we are proposing is not obsolete in 1 year. So maybe that would be a bit of a summary of how we intend to do it. I will not bore you with the process, although I like this drawing. On the slide 21, there is the process diagram. So just to outline, TSOs would be then submitting the standard inputs to the capacity calculation, but on top of that, there would be the benchmark as an input. So it already enters the process at the very beginning. Also then published as part of the parameters, and then we move to the capacity calculation process itself, which is in the centralized tooling. And the new sub-process step is then the ramp adjustment. So you see that we move from all the capacity calculation steps for timestamps. We have the worst of the worst timestamps. We put them together. We merge them into one flow-based domain to really make sure that we have a product that can be applied to the entire year or a month. And then obviously there is this check against the induced flows for each CNEG, and this is where the adjustment will happen. And then we go through the rest of the steps until the end where the splitting would apply for yearly. And we, as I already mentioned, this splitting effect is then mitigated by inflating the domain, the benchmark in the first place. But I think it will do the trick in any case. And this then the results that will be provided to Java for allocation. So maybe this is just to make you familiar with how the process flow will look like and where does it apply, how is it considered along the process. For the diagram going below, this is a very simplified version of what the benchmark will do to the flow-based domain. So we would be moving different CNEGs based on how they respect the induced flow, whether they are below or above. And at the end, the ATC benchmark is basically the yellow square that should be fully encompassed by the flow-based domain as a result. I think what we've been seeing from the initial simulations without the benchmark is that we had very unpredictable results. So it was really like a box of chocolate. It was very difficult to say whether the flow-based domain will be too big, too small, depended on how many timestamps we selected, depended on quality of CGMs, whatnot. And it oftentimes resulted in a very small potato. Let's call the domain a potato. And now we are able to actually ensure that the entire ATC benchmark would be covered thanks to this benchmark adjustment and the introduction. Yet at the same time, the max ATC benchmark makes it proportionate to day-ahead's flow-based domain. So normally there shouldn't be a case where the flow-based domain from day-ahead would be smaller than the long term.
That did go to day-ahead capacity allocation or calculation or not?
No, this is for long term.
Okay, I know.
Yeah, and without LTA inclusion, this will not be included in the day-ahead in any way.
Yeah. This is totally separate world.
As well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No questions. I hope I didn't bore you, but.
And just second question is when we say so in the table, the comparison comes to the result LTA version, you didn't use the thing you're proposing, like the 20%, the proper, having proper 20% in the end. Because basically what the table is saying is that if you have nothing to replace the LTA and then there are some hours that you can't do what you wanted to do, of course the revenue is lower. But if you push the boundaries, which is what is kind of expected as was LTA disappearance, actually you will get again the revenue. So that's what I don't get, because you are making in a study, you assume that nothing is when you remove the LTA, nothing is replacing that. But actually later on we learn to plan to have something to compensate. So in reality, if you apply these things, you can still allocate a large volume, push the boundaries, and then that is the rather than using a 0.9 historical figure, we go for 1.2, you could increase this, because you know that actually you have a mechanism to keep revenue adequacy.
Indeed, the correct.
Actually not. So the table also shows that even today with LTA inclusion, there are 1,000 hours where the day-ahead congestion income is lower than the LTTR payout. So there is already, it's already a big nuance. But the perspective that we want to put in this debate is it should be the available capacity in day-ahead representing the pot of congestion income that defines the appropriate level of LTTR volumes, and not the other way around. Because if you do the other way around, you will not have this picture. So you will have another smaller, more variable domain. And the day capacity should then not depend on what you issue in terms of volume of LTTRs. So it's there to propagate into forward in terms of the hedging, and the day-ahead capacity instead of what you issue for hedging should determine the capacities you issue on the day-ahead market.
I understand, but both cases is a risk view, and it's the risk view. Basically, and what you don't have is the cost associated with maintaining it, which is the way you measure the cost is by saying it's a revenue adequacy. Checking it again.
Yes, because the starting point was the request to find measures to increase the size of the long-term flow-based domain. That was really the starting point. And in order to do that, we have to step away from validation operational security. Otherwise, we are not able to fill in this requirement. So that's essential, because if the perception is that we are worse off and we should not be doing this, then the consequence is then we should accept the current methodology and the fact that it will indeed have lesser volumes for hedging made available. Because we cannot square the circle here. We cannot at the same time increase the volume for hedging in this paradigm of operational security. We can only do that if we have the clean discussion from a financial perspective.
What I don't get is if you want it to be logical, because you're saying, oh, it's only the revenue adequacy I'm looking at, but in your table, you don't consider the total revenue, because you're saying the current framework I'm getting, so you're using the forward bids, okay, so people are paying this amount, and you're saying that I will remunerate them with some congestion income, and then there is a leftover, which I keep. So that's the total. So you are getting one part of money from the TSO perspective, you're getting the forward value plus the leftover. But you're not making the comparison here. You're just checking that I sold a certain amount of long-term capacity and just checking, can I collect this amount of money? And yes, if I took only the mini ETC, I spend more, but still have so on the amount of money I am collecting, yes, I'm spending more, but I still collecting more. That money doesn't go away.
Yeah, and I understand your question. So in your view,
Oké, ik heb dit op het web gevonden voor ja en.
Oh, sorry. You consider the long-term congestion income as part of the risk management strategy that should be taken from a societal perspective, from a tariff payer perspective. It's a question that we did not address explicitly. However, and maybe it's a bit my personal understanding from all discussions here, so I just try to bring it to the table. The underlying of the LTTR is that they had congestion income. And as soon as we start issuing LTTRs, we are actually swapping from a TSO perspective what we have as natural hedge into the forward market. And if we start being dependent on the long-term congestion income, we start doing speculation. Maybe in some years we will hit the jackpot if the market has overestimated the price spreads and was paying more for the long-term congestion income. Good for the consumers, for some of the tariff payers. On the other side, if we had the high price crisis effect, there we know that the payouts were much larger than what was anticipated. And so this is what we principally want to avoid, that we go into this speculation, and counting or being reliable upon the long-term congestion income is exactly going in that direction of speculation. So that's why we are more having the cleaner focus on it's the day-ahead congestion income that should be sufficient to pay back the LTTRs.
With the caveat that once you make the auction, you know what you are supposed to give, and that means you can optimize it, which was hidden in the LTA inclusion, but that's because there is dynamic allocation. So if the market that decided really likes a direction, then all the topology, everything can be optimized so that on a daily basis, you don't reach any constraint. So it's not like, because you have the natural hedge. Here you're making all sorts of consideration on the future grid, but actually the actual grid is in your control. So you have multiple ways of mitigating the non-adequacy of volume.
It seems like we are avoiding physical risk entirely. Like we are moving entirely only in financial trading, like trading with the stocks.
And there are rules, and yeah, but and maybe that's the discussion we will have after lunch on the. So let's keep then the discussion there. Otherwise, we will be too hungry.
Maybe so there was, you have the question, is the 20% hard floor that was at some point considered?
After lunch.
Was that,
That's the after lunch discussion. Let's finish off the LTCC part. So I think, Patricia, you wanted to say something on the planning and so to finish this off, and then we have lunch, and then we go into the LTA removal discussion.
I think it ties to the LT, but because it's on the slides of the figures. So
we didn't simulate the. But I think we actually covered all the theory through and through for what we're proposing in the LTCCM. What matters for you, it's not only the theory, but how it materializes. And in order to give you the best experience of what the flow-based domains will be, how does the LTFPA actually, how does it materialize and in the allocated volumes. The next big milestone for LTCC and for TSOs is the external parallel run. Undeniably, the clock is ticking, so we would really like to start the external parallel run already in November this year and run it until basically October, if you look at the calendar, but we would still cover the monthly calculation of November. So that's why I said November at the beginning. So starting in November 2025 and going until the go live next year, we would really like to start then with the yearly computation as it would be in the standard setup. But as said, at the same time, besides the capacity calculation process, we would also like to simulate the allocations. Allocations still using the historical bits because that's really the best guess we have. It also gives you maybe an impression of how it will look like, but at the same time, in parallel to external parallel run the simulation